Hello, this is Sandy Nadelson, and it's week 3 of our class, and this is a redo of the Literature Review and Theoretical Framework PowerPoint audio. Not sure why the other one started out okay and then stopped, but hopefully we'll get through this one and have some better success. The learning outcomes for this chapter include identifying the purpose of the Literature Review for research and evidence-based practice. Projects describe how a framework or theory guides research, distinguish between conceptual and data-based literature and primary and secondary resources, compare the advantages and disadvantages of different types of databases and resources, and apply critiquing criteria to research articles, and conduct a review of research literature. So, when you're talking about research, there is definitely, or should be, a connection between theory, research, and practice. Hopefully, for most things we do have some sort of theory that guides what we're doing. We research and make sure that our theory is actually true, and then we put that into practice. Sometimes, though, we do something in practice and then we're like, ooh, I wonder if we actually have any basis for doing this. For example, when I was a student and even a new grad, we thought that when people had red spots, a stage 1 to cube, a pressure ulcer, that it was good to massage that massaging was a good thing to do, and that would help because it would bring the blood flow to that area. And so people would regularly massage these red areas, and finally someone decided, well, maybe we should actually look at some research and do something to see if this was true. And research proved that that was not a good idea, and that massaging the areas don't help, in fact may even hurt. So that's why we want to make sure we're doing practice that is based on evidence and based on also theory. So when we're doing, going to do some a literature review, we can do that to base our research. We can look at theory, we can look at practice, and look at education and see what everything says about literature in the literature, and that helps guide what we're going to be doing. Literature review purpose, we want to look at theories. What is in the literature about theories? Are there conceptual frameworks? Is there a database of knowledge that has been covered or not been covered? We don't want to do research that's already been done, and we also want to do research that is based on theory, because that helps build knowledge. For example, if someone wants to look at the topic of civility in nursing and how nurses interact, there is some theory, some conceptual frameworks for that. And if we have the same definition of what is civility and incivility, that can help us in terms of identifying what are we going to do with this research, where does it go, and are we comparing apples to apples. If someone defines civility very different than someone else, and it's hard to compare research studies, so having similar definitions, similar tools like research assessment tools, kind of the questionnaire or something like that, is very helpful. For practice, the literature review can uncover new knowledge about best practices. For example, if we're doing some suctioning, and we can take a look, hey, are we really suctioning well? Let's look in the literature and see what the literature says. For education, it provides us the latest knowledge. Hopefully what you're learning in class and in your clinical settings are based on knowledge that has come from past research, or at least from the literature and from theories in literature. So in terms of research, when we're doing a literature review, we want to develop a strong knowledge base for research studies. We want to have a good understanding what's going on. And by that, what I mean is you want to identify a theoretical framework, something to base your work on, then determine what is known and unknown. Determine what gaps or inconsistencies or consistencies happen. You want to say, well, maybe there's some research done in a particular area, maybe on family violence, but we haven't looked at family violence in terms of chronic illness. And so that, or maybe the chronic illness shows, for example, or some studies show that when people have chronic illness, particularly a child with chronic illness, that there's more likely for families to have divorce, and others were not. Well, that's inconsistent, so maybe more research needs to be done to help identify that. Maybe they're not looking at all the same variables. Maybe their definitions aren't correct, so we need to look at that. Also, by looking at the literature, we can help identify what are research questions, hypotheses. When we're looking at literature, what have other people said? Do we want to say something similar, change it a little bit? That can give us some focus. It also can help some with research design. There's pretty much no literature that is found. Then people might want to look at maybe doing a qualitative study versus a quantitative study. Remember, qualitative is the ones where usually people are interviewed and there's deep study into phenomena. That can help. A lot of research has been done. Probably a qualitative study isn't the most important, the best way to go. And so go with the quantitative. It can also help synthesize strength and weakness of known evidence. So what's there and is it good? When doing a quantitative study, remember those are the numbers, those are ones that might have something like a survey, say, or some sort of research protocol. Maybe like with one of the postings on the web campus site, someone wanted to look at bed sores and turning patients. So they would look at, how often they got turned, how many bed sores, how many problems arose. You're doing a research study like that. That's the quantitative study. You really definitely want to get a literature search done. And the literature search then provides information about the research problem, the question and hypotheses, the significance to nursing, theoretical framework, the design, how we're going to do the study, how we're going to set it up, the instruments we're going to use. Is it going to be a survey? Is there going to be some sort of review of literature? Is there a review of charts? What's going to go on with that? And then that kind of goes with the method for data collection. Is one person going to do it and analyze it? A variety of people? Who are those people and how are they going to be trained? So the research done, and then afterwards want to look back at the literature and see, hey, how do our results compare to others? Is it similar? Is it different? What are we going to do with this information? Should changes in practice be done? Should changes in education or further research be done? That is all included in a research report about a quantitative study, or at least it should be included. For qualitative, research literature reviews usually aren't done, or at least not to the extent, because most of the time there's just not a lot in there. The literature review can depend, and depends on what kind of study it is. The phenomenological can look for literature to help interpret study findings. Constant comparative can also look at the literature. And then historical research also can look at the literature to get data in terms of maybe someone wanted to do a research study on the way nurses were educated on skincare throughout the last decade, and probably even longer than that. Let's say last century. They might look at old nursing textbooks, and those books, the literature would be their source of information. So they'd compare, maybe there is information, very little information in the 1930s and more in the 40s and 50s. They might look at a variety of things like that. About frameworks and theories. You'll hear these terms used, and oftentimes theoretical frameworks and conceptual frameworks are used interchangeably. Usually theoretical frameworks are a little bit more in-depth, and they can be derived from nursing theories. There are theoretical frameworks, of course, that aren't nursing theories. There might be some, and oftentimes used related to psychology, sociology, education, and it still is nursing research. When we have a theoretical framework, there's going to be literature that is available, and usually in the nursing literature, but it might be other areas too. And it's helpful because it helps identify where you're going to go. What does this research mean? What are the key concepts? How are we going to study them? Gives that kind of grounded foundation. Same with conceptual frameworks. Conceptual frameworks are, there's usually a variety of different words. Say, for example, some of the work I've done on student retention. We might have a conceptual framework of, what the student comes with, what the student resources are, what the student comes with, how much knowledge do they have? What are the resources? Do they have financial support? Are they having problems with that? Do they have people support? Those would be all concepts within conceptual framework, and we might put it together to say, oh, okay, well, this helps us understand the process. Now let's research. Are we really are these really factors, or are there some that are stronger factors than others? And so once again, it gives us a little roadmap and way to perform our study. Components of a theory, there's some sort of phenomena, something that happens, something that's there. There's some assumptions about the world. I teach a graduate level research class, and some of my students were looking at men in nursing, and some of the assumptions of the researchers, if they were male, it tended to be that men needed to be in nursing and that men were a good part of nursing, and identifying those components of those assumptions is really helpful. Concepts. What are the ideas and mental images with male nurses? Some of the concepts that were coming out were discrimination, limitations in their ability to get jobs, things like that. And then there's also definitions related to concepts. You can have a concept like discrimination, but what does really discrimination mean? You need to have a serious definition. You're talking about, different wages, you're talking about being treated poorly in terms of interactions, being ignored. So having some definitions is really helpful, and a theory can help provide that in literature too. Also relationships. How do these relationships fit together, and how do they make a bigger picture? So I hear people talk about concepts or building blocks or frameworks, things like I mentioned, discrimination or student retention. That's another, it's a pretty big variable. What does that really mean? Does that mean they're just passing a class, they're getting out of a nursing program, they're not only passing, but they're passing the nursing program, but also the NCLEX. What does that all mean? So you'll hear people talk about variables. Those are more specific and particularly related to operational definitions. So that's operational definition. How are we actually going to study this? So say we're talking about maybe children and self-esteem. You might operationalize the definition by a particular score. A child has, moderate self-esteem if they get, maybe a 50 to 70 out of 100 on this particular test, or maybe 70 to 100 is high self-esteem. So how are we actually going to test it, and how are we going to figure out what's going on there? Once again, the conceptual concept has conceptual definition. It's more abstract, has some general meaning, and it's rooted hopefully in the literature. And once again, things you might hear might be, we talked about self-esteem, discrimination. Some other concepts might be related to more physiological hemodynamics. Hemodynamics. Okay, we have a basic idea of that, but what do we really mean? The patient is, in homeostasis. That's another concept. So how are we going to define that? Then that is the operational definition. Maybe we want to say that we want to look at their urine output versus their intake. We might want to look at their blood pressure. We might want to look at some other things that would help us define, like homeostasis or something like that. And oftentimes some sort of instrument, some sort of a research tool is used to help with that. So for example, might talk about like pain and what is pain. It might be, there's a lot of different things when it comes to pain. We're talking about the actual pain itself, but we're talking about disability? Does it relate to ethnicity? Is there a difference in that? So I want to get more specific, and that's related to, being able to define not only the concepts, but how they relate to each other and how we're going to study them. Functional disability, what does that really mean? Are we talking about physical and social functioning limits? Probably, but we need to define that when we're doing a tool. An operational definition might be to use the SIP, a short form about health-related functioning, and that can help measure it. Moving on to nursing theory and research. Research is linked to theories in two ways. First, it might be theory generating. In other words, the researcher develops a new type of research from that. And oftentimes, in terms of method, you will hear people talk about qualitative research, and grounded theory is a method in which the researcher actually develops a theory from what they study. Theory testing usually relates to the quantitative, the more analytical, the more numbers-oriented type of research. And so we have a theory first, and then we see how it works. But both methods can increase nursing knowledge, and both should be valued in nursing. So once again, the type of frameworks, the qualitative, you usually see the literature review towards the end, if at all. Researchers move from particular situations of an experience, like some of my students were reading about ER nurses and intuition. So they interviewed a pile of ER nurses, and then after that, then they came up with some ideas and then went to build on a theory. So they go from concrete, these nurses' experience, to abstract, more of a theory, an explanation of it all. Quantitative, once again, you'll usually see the framework at the beginning in the research literature review at the beginning. It guides the study from the introduction throughout. So you move from abstract, the theory, to the concrete. What are we going to study? And people talked about deductive reasoning as you're going from larger to the more abstract to the more concrete. And the way I think about it, deductive, it decreases. You go from bigger to smaller. While inductive, the qualitative, you're increasing. You go from specific to large. I would know these two terms. I am pretty sure you will see those in your future. Talking about conceptual versus database literature. Conceptual are talking about theories, usually more non-scholarly in terms of research articles, more opinions. Not that this is bad. You need to have concepts. But it's a little bit different than the database, which you're looking at research articles that are published research. It may also include, though, master's thesis, dissertations, and some other research reviews. Here people talk about primary and secondary sources of literature. Primary usually is when you're looking at things that a particular author wrote. For example, you're looking at, there's some people like Bandura who looked at social interactions. His books, his literature, his chapters, his articles are considered to be primary sources. While if someone writes about him, like in your psych book, your mental health book, probably had Bandura mentioned, probably also like Erickson in child development. When the books are writing about that person's stuff, then that's considered secondary sources. You might find it in a book itself, you might find it in an article, but when the person isn't actually writing, someone's writing about that, that's a secondary source. There are many, many resources for you to use on the web and other places. CINAHL is a very good one for nursing and medical, also Medline. Those are not the only ones. There's quite a few others that the library can help you find that have additional stuff. And you should be using, in my opinion, more than just CINAHL, particularly if you're doing more psychosocial related. So if you're looking at maybe patient stress or people's stress, you would want to look more in the psychology or sociology literature, not just in nursing. Some other things, Sigma Theta Tau has a website with information. The Agency for Health Research and Quality has some great information, and then Cochrane has kind of best practices. And hopefully you've looked at that website, Cochrane, or you should in the future because it's an excellent resource, as are the other two. In Sigma Theta Tau, the Nursing Online database is presented there. And you can search unpublished research, so some additional stuff is helpful. When you're looking at web resources, be aware of the endings. You know how you'll see like CNN.com, but some other things might be .org or .edu or .gov. It's helpful to know where who's paying for these. Basically, .com is a commercial, C-O-M commercial. So someone is somehow related to usually money. So I don't trust a .com. For example, I'll see little things pop up on my screen. Oh, buy this product, it'll help you reduce your weight. And it'll be, weightloss.com. I'm not going to trust that much as a .org. Usually orgs are nonprofit companies and or larger organizations that are less likely to be for profit. EDUs has to relate to education. .gov is related to the government and has to be a government organization. So I respect the latter ones versus the first one. Not that the .com might not provide some additional information that's useful, but I want to be a little more skeptical about that and see where did they get this from, what kind of research. Also, you take a look at what are the authors. What are they affiliated with? You know, if someone's trying to push some sort of hormone and they're working for a company that sells the hormone, you know, I'm going to be a little less accepting of that. Do they have appropriate credentials? Is this a person who's had any graduate study, any research work? Also take a look at, you know, do they have any references? Have they looked at the literature and are they being upfront about the literature? I particularly appreciate when researchers put the pros and the cons. This research supports what I said and this doesn't, that they're being honest and open. So then I can make the decision rather than them telling what I should think. And is there enough data? You know, if they're saying, oh yes, this particular pill worked wonderful, we did a study on 20 people. Well, I don't know who those 20 people are. So I want to know, you know, is that information based on reality and important stuff that actually makes a difference? In nursing, you can find a variety of resources. Textbooks are helpful, special topics books, monographs, nursing journals. Refereed and peer-reviewed journals are better, and those are things that you can find in the database, whether it's, usually the journal will say itself whether it's peer-reviewed. That means when someone submitted an article, it was sent off to people who know that area, and they reviewed it and said whether it's worthwhile or not. That's different than like the American Journal for Nursing, not slamming that journal at all, but they pay people to do the research, and it's not necessarily refereed the same way as like the nursing research journal, which is much more scrutinized. And that research then, you can bet, is more likely to be true and accurate and usable. As one's critiquing, you want to like, is the literature review organized and complete? Are there gaps or inconsistencies? Are there relevant variables included? So, you know, does it seem like they're talking about all they need to talk about? Is there critical thinking, analysis, and synthesis reflected? Do they kind of say, well, this is what the literature says, and this is then how it fits with my my research, and then at the end what I found for those quantitative things? Are both conceptual and database literatures included, and are they primary source? Those are helpful to show that it's a stronger study. And is the time reference of the articles appropriate? Usually 3 to 5 years are good. If you're going back 10 years, if you're doing it yourself, sometimes you can find some older ones, particularly if it's a classic work that everyone references. That's kind of the basis of knowledge, then those are okay. But if there are a whole pile of them all 10 years or more, I'm going to start wondering, how current is this person and how good is this literature review? As you're doing your critiques, take a look at the criteria for evaluating the qualitative and the quantitative research articles. And hopefully that helped you, and have a wonderful day. Nice talking with you. Bye now.